Bullies threw a homeless mother into the ravine, her little son's cry. Stopped the Alpha King. Mid-hunt. The autumn wind swept through the narrow streets of Portland, carrying with it the scent of rain and rotting leaves. Eleanor Hayes clutched her threadbare coat tighter around her thin frame, her other arm wrapped protectively around her 4-year-old son, Thomas. The boy's cheeks were hollow, his eyes too large for his small face, but he never complained. Not once. They had been living on the streets for 3 months now, ever since the landlord had evicted them from their cramped apartment. Eleanor had lost her job at the textile factory when she'd missed too many days caring for Thomas during his bout with pneumonia. No job meant no rent money, and no rent money meant the cold embrace of the streets. "Mama, I'm hungry," Thomas whispered, his small hand tugging at her sleeve. Eleanor's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, the same way it did every time he said those words. "I know, sweetheart. Mama will find us something soon, I promise." Before you continue with their story, if you're watching from somewhere in the world, leave a comment telling us where you're from. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories coming your way. They made their way toward the soup kitchen on Morrison Street. But Eleanor knew they were too late. The line would already be closed, the doors locked until tomorrow. Still, she had to try. For Thomas, she would always try. As they rounded the corner near the old railway bridge, Eleanor's stomach dropped. 3 figures stood blocking the narrow path ahead, the same 3 who had tormented them for weeks now. Marcus Thornton and his 2 companions, Derek and Cole, were sons of wealthy merchants who found entertainment in tormenting those less fortunate. Well, Marcus drawled, his expensive wool coat a stark contrast to Eleanor's rags. If it isn't the beggar woman and her little rat. Eleanor tried to step around them, keeping Thomas behind her. "Please, we don't want any trouble. Just let us pass." Derek moved to block their path, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "What's the rush? We just want to talk." "We have nothing you want," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Please." Cole laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the brick walls. "That's where you're wrong. See? You're bad for business. You and your brat make the street look even worse than it already is. Scares away the customers from our father's shops." "We'll move," Eleanor said quickly. "We'll find somewhere else to stay. Just please, leave us alone." Marcus stepped closer, and Eleanor could smell the whiskey on his breath. "It's too late for that. We've given you plenty of warnings. Time to make sure you get the message." Before Eleanor could react, Derek grabbed Thomas, yanking the boy away from her. Thomas screamed, reaching for his mother with desperate hands. "No, let him go!" Eleanor lunged forward, but Marcus caught her arm, his grip bruising. "Take the boy to the edge," Marcus ordered. "Let's see if she learns to stay away when she sees what happens to those who don't listen." Cole dragged Thomas toward the ravine, a steep drop that led down to the rocky creek bed below. The boy's screams pierced the evening air, but no one came. No one ever came to help people like them. Eleanor fought with a mother's fury, kicking and clawing at Marcus, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the ravine as well, Derek joining him to restrain her thrashing form. "Mama! Mama!" Thomas's voice was raw with terror. "Let me go. Please. He's just a child. Take me, but please don't hurt him." Eleanor's pleas fell on deaf ears. They reached the edge of the ravine, and Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The drop was at least 30 feet, the bottom littered with jagged rocks and fallen branches. No one could survive such a fall. "Maybe this will teach you to know your place," Marcus hissed in her ear. Then he pushed. Eleanor felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness as she tumbled backward over the edge. The world spun. Sky, earth, sky again. And then came the impact. Pain exploded through her body as she hit the slope, tumbling and rolling down the steep incline. Rocks tore at her skin, branches whipped her face, and then she hit the bottom with a force that drove all the air from her lungs. She lay there, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every part of her body screamed in agony. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Thomas's voice from above. "Mama! Mama, please get up! Mama!" Eleanor tried to respond, tried to tell him she was alive, but no sound would come. Blood trickled into her eyes from a gash on her forehead. She could feel something wrong inside her chest. Broken ribs, certainly. Maybe worse. Above, she heard Marcus's voice, cold and satisfied. "Come on, let's go. She's done for." "What about the kid?" Derek asked. "Leave him. He'll either die out here or end up in an orphanage. Either way, not our problem anymore." Their footsteps faded, and then there was only Thomas's crying. Heartbroken, terrified sobs that echoed through the ravine. Eleanor tried again to move, to call out to her son, but her body wouldn't obey. The pain was overwhelming, dragging her down into darkness. She fought against it, knowing that if she lost consciousness, she might never wake up. And what would happen to Thomas then? The boy's cries continued, growing more desperate. "Help! Somebody help! My mama needs help!" The forest beyond the ravine was dense and wild, a place where few people ventured, especially as darkness fell. But Thomas's voice carried through the trees, piercing and pure in its desperation. Miles away, in the deep woods that bordered the city's edge, another sound had been echoing through the trees, the baying of hunting dogs and the calls of men on horseback. Alexander Blackwood, the wealthiest landowner in the Pacific Northwest, was leading his annual autumn hunt. His estate covered thousands of acres, and he was known throughout Oregon as a man of power and influence. At 32, Alexander was in his prime, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had built his fortune through timber and shipping, and his word was law in these parts. People called him the Alpha King, though never to his face. He commanded respect through his presence alone, and few dared to cross him. The hunt had been going well. His dogs had tracked a magnificent stag through the forest, and Alexander was close to the kill. But then, something strange happened. The dogs stopped. Alexander pulled his horse to a halt, frowning. His hunting master, James, rode up beside him. "What's wrong with them?" The dogs were whining, their ears flat against their heads. They had abandoned the stag's trail entirely and were now facing east, toward the city. "I don't know," Alexander said. "They've never done this before." Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable. A child's cry, desperate and afraid. "Help! Somebody please! My mama's hurt!" Alexander's blood ran cold. He had heard many sounds in these woods, the calls of animals, the wind through the trees, but never the cry of a child in distress. "Did you hear that?" he asked James. The hunting master nodded, his face pale. "Sounds like it's coming from the ravine near the old railway bridge." Without another word, Alexander spurred his horse forward. The hunt was forgotten. His men followed, crashing through the underbrush as they raced toward the sound of the crying child. They emerged from the forest near the railway bridge, and Alexander immediately spotted the small figure at the edge of the ravine. A boy, no more than 4 or 5 years old, leaning over the edge and screaming for help. Alexander dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, running to the child. "What's happened? Where are your parents?" Thomas spun around, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "My mama, bad men pushed her down there. She's not moving. Please, you have to help her." Alexander looked over the edge of the ravine, and his jaw clenched. At the bottom, barely visible in the fading light, he could see a crumpled figure lying motionless among the rocks. "James, get the ropes. Thompson, ride back to the estate and fetch Dr. Morrison. Tell him it's an emergency. The rest of you with me." His men sprang into action with military precision. Alexander tied a rope around his waist and began the descent into the ravine, his boots finding purchase on the steep slope. Behind him, 2 of his men followed, carrying a makeshift stretcher. Thomas watched from above, his small hands clasped together. Please save her. Please. The descent was treacherous, but Alexander moved with purpose. When he reached the bottom, his heart sank. The woman was in terrible condition. Her face was pale and covered in blood, her breathing shallow and labored. But she was alive. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Alexander knelt beside her, carefully checking for injuries. Broken ribs. Certainly. Possibly internal bleeding. A head wound that needed immediate attention. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with pain. "Thomas," she whispered. "My son, is he—" "He's safe," Alexander assured her. "He's the one who brought us here. You're going to be all right. I'm going to get you out of here. The men, they pushed me." Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "Don't try to talk. Save your strength." Alexander looked up at his men. "We need to move her carefully, support her neck and back." They worked with practiced efficiency, securing Eleanor to the stretcher. The ascent was slow and agonizing, every movement causing Eleanor to gasp in pain, but Alexander's men were skilled. They had dealt with hunting accidents before, though never anything quite like this. When they finally reached the top, Thomas threw himself at his mother, sobbing. "Mama, you're alive." Eleanor managed a weak smile, her hand reaching for her son's face. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Alexander looked at the boy, then at the woman, and felt something shift in his chest. He had seen poverty before. It was impossible to avoid in a city like Portland. But he had never been confronted with it so directly, so viscerally. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice hard. Eleanor's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw the fierce spirit that had kept her alive. "Marcus Thornton and his friends. They said we were bad for business." Alexander's jaw clenched. He knew the Thornton family. Marcus's father, Gerald, was a merchant who had tried multiple times to gain favor with Alexander. The man was a social climber, always looking for ways to increase his standing. "James, take them to the estate. Dr. Morrison should be there by the time you arrive. Make sure she gets the best care possible." "Yes, sir. And send word to the sheriff. I want Marcus Thornton and his accomplices arrested tonight." Eleanor tried to protest. "No, please. They're powerful. They'll answer for what they've done," Alexander said firmly. "No one commits such an act in my territory and walks away unpunished." As his men carefully loaded Eleanor onto a wagon, Alexander knelt down to Thomas's level. The boy looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "What's your name, son?" "Thomas, sir. Thomas Hayes." "Well, Thomas Hayes, you were very brave today. You saved your mother's life by calling for help. Is she really going to be okay?" Alexander looked at the small, frightened face and made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to make sure of it. Both of you are going to be taken care of. You have my word." Thomas's lower lip trembled. "We don't have any money to pay you." "I'm not asking for payment. Sometimes people just need help, and today you needed help, so I'm giving it." The wagon rolled away toward Alexander's estate, and he stood watching it go, his mind already working through what needed to be done. The sheriff would need to be pressured to actually arrest the Thornton boy. The family had money and influence, but not as much as Alexander. The woman would need medical care, and the boy would need food and shelter. But beyond the practical considerations, something else stirred in Alexander's chest. He had spent years building his empire, accumulating wealth and power. But for what? To hunt stags in the forest and attend tedious social functions? For the first time in years, he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. By the time Alexander arrived at his estate, Dr. Morrison was already examining Eleanor. The physician was a stern-faced man in his 60s, but his hands were gentle as he worked. "How is she?" Alexander asked, entering the guest room where they had placed her. 3 broken ribs, severe bruising, a concussion, and multiple lacerations, Dr. Morrison reported. She's lucky to be alive. Another few hours without treatment and she might not have made it. Thomas sat in a chair beside the bed, refusing to leave his mother's side. One of the housemaids had cleaned him up and brought him food, but the plate sat untouched. Will she recover? Alexander asked. With proper care and rest, yes, but she'll need weeks, possibly months, to fully heal. She's severely malnourished, which complicates things. Her body doesn't have the resources it needs to heal properly. Alexander nodded. Then she'll stay here until she's recovered. Both of them will. Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That's quite generous of you, Alexander. It's the right thing to do. After the doctor left, Alexander approached Thomas. The boy looked up at him with exhausted eyes. Have you eaten? Alexander asked. Thomas shook his head. I'm not hungry. Your mother would want you to eat. You need to keep your strength up for her. Thomas looked at his mother's pale face, then back at Alexander. Will you really let us stay here? As long as you need to. Why? You don't know us. It was a fair question, and Alexander found himself considering it. Why was he doing this? He could have sent them to the hospital, made sure they were cared for, and washed his hands of the whole affair. But something about the boy's desperate cry, about the mother's fierce determination to protect her child, even as she lay broken at the bottom of a ravine. It had touched something in him he thought had died long ago. Because your mother fought to protect you, even when she had nothing left to fight with, Alexander said finally. That kind of courage deserves to be honored, and because no child should have to watch his mother suffer and feel helpless to stop it. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, and Alexander felt his chest tighten. He wasn't good with children, had never spent much time around them, but he found himself wanting to comfort this small, brave boy. Get some rest, Alexander said gently. I'll have one of the maids bring you some warm milk. Your mother is safe now. You both are. As he left the room, Alexander encountered his housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, in the hallway. The elderly woman had been with him for 15 years and knew him better than anyone. That was a good thing you did today, sir, she said. It was the only thing to do. Not everyone would see it that way. Most men of your position would have sent them to the charity hospital and forgotten about them. Alexander looked back toward the room where Eleanor lay sleeping, and Thomas kept his vigil. I'm not most men. No, sir, you're not. That night, Alexander sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk before him. The sheriff had come and gone, promising to arrest Marcus Thornton and his companions by morning. The Thornton family would protest, of course, but Alexander's influence was greater than theirs. Justice would be served. But Alexander's thoughts kept returning to Eleanor Hayes and her son. Who were they? How had they ended up on the streets? What circumstances had led them to that ravine? He had asked Mrs. Patterson to find out what she could, and the housekeeper had a way of gathering information. By morning, he would know their story. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, Mrs. Patterson entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. I thought you might be hungry, sir. You missed dinner. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. What have you learned? The housekeeper set down the tray and folded her hands. Eleanor Hayes, 26 years old, widow. Her husband, Robert Hayes, died 2 years ago in a factory accident. She worked at the Riverside textile mill until 3 months ago, when she was dismissed for missing work while caring for her sick son. Without income, she couldn't pay rent and was evicted. Since then, she and the boy have been living on the streets. Alexander's hand tightened around his glass. And no family to help them? Her parents died when she was young. Robert's family disowned him when he married her. She was a factory worker. They considered her beneath them. After he died, They wanted nothing to do with her or the child. What about charity organizations? The church? The orphanage would have taken the boy, but only if she gave him up. She refused. As for the churches, they do what they can, but there are so many in need. She and Thomas were just two more faces in a sea of poverty. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out over his vast estate. Acres of manicured lawns, gardens, stables, and forests. More wealth than one man could spend in a lifetime. And just a few miles away, a woman and her child had been starving in the streets. "It's not right," he said quietly. "No, sir, it's not. But it's the way of the world." "Then perhaps the world needs to change." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Perhaps it does, sir. Perhaps it does." Over the next few days, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to heal. Dr. Morrison visited daily, changing bandages and monitoring her progress. Thomas never left her side except when the maids insisted he needed to bathe or sleep. Alexander found himself checking on them multiple times a day, though he couldn't explain why. He would stand in the doorway, watching Thomas read to his mother from books the household staff had found for him, or seeing the boy carefully spoon broth into Eleanor's mouth when she was strong enough to eat. The devotion between mother and son was absolute, and it stirred something in Alexander's heart, a longing for something he had never known. His own childhood had been cold and formal, his parents more concerned with social standing than affection. He had inherited his father's business acumen and his mother's pride, but he had never known the kind of unconditional love he witnessed between Eleanor and Thomas. On the fourth day, Eleanor finally woke fully, her eyes clear and focused. Thomas was asleep in the chair beside her bed, and she reached out with a trembling hand to touch his hair. "He hasn't left your side," Alexander said from the doorway. Eleanor's head turned sharply. Then she winced at the movement. You're the man who saved us. Alexander Blackwood." He entered the room and stood at the foot of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fell off a cliff," Eleanor said with a weak attempt at humor. Then her expression grew serious. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "I don't want repayment. I want you to focus on getting better." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this? We're nothing to you. Just street trash. Like Marcus said." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Marcus Thornton is in jail, along with his friends. They'll be tried for attempted murder." Eleanor's eyes widened. But his family is wealthy. They'll never let him be punished. His family doesn't have the influence they think they do, not compared to mine. Alexander pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "Mrs. Hayes, I want you to tell me your story. All of it. How you ended up in that situation." "Why does it matter?" "Because I want to understand. And because I want to help. But I need to know what you need." Eleanor looked at her sleeping son, then back at Alexander. And slowly, haltingly, she told him everything. About Robert's death, about losing her job, about the eviction, about the nights spent huddled in doorways, trying to keep Thomas warm, about the soup kitchens and the charity lines and the constant, gnawing fear that she wouldn't be able to protect her son. "I tried so hard," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a woman with a child. I tried to keep us fed, but there was never enough. And I tried to keep Thomas safe, but I failed. I couldn't even protect him from those monsters." "You didn't fail," Alexander said firmly. "You survived. Both of you survived. And that took more strength than most people will ever need in their entire lives." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "When I'm healed, where do we go? We have nothing. No money, no home, no prospects." Alexander had been thinking about this question since the moment he'd pulled Eleanor from that ravine. He had the resources to help them, more than enough. The question was how to do it in a way that preserved Eleanor's dignity. "I have a proposition for you," he said carefully. "My estate is large, and I'm in need of additional staff. I could use someone to help manage the household accounts and correspondence. The position would come with a cottage on the grounds, a salary, and education for Thomas." Eleanor stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life, on your own terms, with your own earnings, not charity, employment. But I have no experience with estate management. I was a factory worker." "You can read and write, can't you?" "Yes, but then you can learn the rest. Mrs. Patterson will train you. She's been after me for years to hire an assistant." Eleanor's hands twisted in the bedsheets. "I don't understand. Why would you do this? You could hire someone with experience, someone from a good family." Alexander leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Because I believe that people deserve second chances. Because I believe that circumstances don't define worth. And because when I look at you and your son, I see strength and courage that most of the good families I know will never possess. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll take the job and give yourself and Thomas a chance at a real life." Eleanor looked at her son, still sleeping peacefully in the chair. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake, terrified of what would become of them. She thought about the desperation that had driven her to beg on street corners and dig through refuse bins for scraps of food. And she thought about the alternative, returning to the streets once she healed, trying to survive another winter with no shelter, watching Thomas grow thinner and weaker until... "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll take the job. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you so much." Alexander felt something warm spread through his chest. Satisfaction, yes, but something more. Something that felt almost like hope. "Good. Then it's settled. You'll stay here until you're fully recovered, and then we'll get you and Thomas settled into the cottage. Mrs. Patterson will begin your training when Dr. Morrison says you're ready." As he stood to leave, Eleanor called out to him, "Mr. Blackwood, why did you really do this? Please, tell me the truth." Alexander paused at the door, considering his answer. "Because your son's cry for help reminded me that there's more to life than building empires and accumulating wealth. It reminded me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply help someone who needs it. And because..." He hesitated, then continued, "Because I've spent so long being the Alpha King that I'd forgotten what it meant to simply be human." He left before Eleanor could respond, but as he walked down the hallway, he felt lighter than he had in years. The trial of Marcus Thornton and his accomplices took place 3 weeks later. Alexander attended, sitting in the gallery with Thomas beside him. Eleanor was still too weak to make the journey, but she had insisted that Thomas go. "He needs to see that justice exists," she had said. "He needs to know that what happened to us was wrong, and that wrong things can be made right." The courtroom was packed. The Thornton family had hired expensive lawyers, and Gerald Thornton sat in the front row, his face red with indignation. But Alexander had hired lawyers too, the best in Oregon, and he had made sure that every piece of evidence was presented clearly and completely. Thomas testified, his small voice steady as he described what had happened. Several other witnesses came forward, people who had seen Marcus and his friends tormenting Eleanor and Thomas in the weeks before the attack. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Thornton's face went white. His mother sobbed. His father stood, shouting about injustice and corruption, but the judge's gavel silenced him. "Marcus Thornton, Derek Sullivan, and Cole Henderson, you have been found guilty of attempted murder and assault. You are hereby sentenced to 10 years of hard labor, with the possibility of parole after 7 years if you demonstrate genuine rehabilitation." Alexander felt Thomas's small hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Gerald Thornton confronted Alexander. "You did this," he spat. "You turned everyone against my son. He's just a boy who made a mistake. Your son tried to murder a woman and orphan a child," Alexander said coldly. "That's not a mistake. That's a crime. And if you had raised him with even a shred of decency, it never would have happened. You'll regret this, Blackwood. I'll make sure of it. Threaten me again, and I'll ensure you join your son in prison. Now get out of my sight." Gerald Thornton slunk away, and Alexander looked down at Thomas. "Are you all right?" The boy nodded. "Can we go tell Mama now? She'll want to know." "Yes, let's go home." Home. The word felt right in a way Alexander's estate never had before. Eleanor's recovery was slow but steady. By the end of the second month, she was able to walk without pain and had begun her training with Mrs. Patterson. The housekeeper was a demanding teacher, but Eleanor proved to be a quick study. She had a natural head for numbers and a meticulous attention to detail that served her well in managing the household accounts. Thomas, meanwhile, had blossomed under the care and attention of the estate staff. Alexander had hired a tutor for the boy, and Thomas proved to be remarkably bright. He devoured books the way other children devoured sweets, and his questions about everything from astronomy to zoology kept his tutor constantly challenged. Alexander found himself spending more and more time with both of them. He would join Thomas for lessons sometimes, impressed by the boy's quick mind. He would discuss household matters with Eleanor, valuing her practical perspective on things he had taken for granted. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the three of them became something like a family. It was Mrs. Patterson who first noticed the change in Alexander. "You're different these days, sir," she said one evening as she brought him his usual nightcap. "Different how?" "Happier, more present. For years, you've been going through the motions of life, managing your business, attending your social obligations, but you haven't really been living. These past months, I've seen you actually smile, actually laugh. It's good to see." Alexander considered this. She was right, he realized. For the first time in years, he looked forward to coming home. Not to an empty mansion filled with expensive things, but to a place where people cared about him. Not for his money or influence, but simply for himself. He had dinner with Eleanor and Thomas most evenings now, abandoning the formal dining room for the smaller, cozier breakfast room. They would talk about their days, share stories, and laugh together. Thomas would show off what he had learned in his lessons, and Eleanor would discuss the household accounts or ask Alexander's advice on various matters. It felt natural. It felt right. But Alexander was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Eleanor was his employee, and he was determined not to take advantage of her vulnerable position. He treated her with respect and courtesy, never overstepping, never presuming, even as his feelings for her grew deeper with each passing day. Winter came to Oregon, bringing with it cold rains and early darkness. The cottage where Eleanor and Thomas now lived was warm and comfortable, a far cry from the streets where they had nearly died. Eleanor had made it a home, filling it with small touches, curtains she had sewn herself, flowers from the estate gardens, books from Alexander's library that he had insisted she borrow. One evening in December, Alexander was working in his study when he heard a knock at the door. "Come in." Eleanor entered, carrying a ledger. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I found a discrepancy in the accounts that I wanted to discuss." "Of course. Sit down." As they reviewed the numbers together, Alexander found himself distracted by her presence. She had regained weight over the past months, and her face had lost its gaunt, haunted look. Her hair, which had been dull and lifeless, now shone in the lamplight. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in the polished, artificial way of the society women he knew, but in a natural, genuine way that took his breath away. Mr. Blackwood. Did you hear what I said? Alexander blinked. I'm sorry. I was distracted. Could you repeat that? Eleanor gave him a curious look, but repeated her question about the accounts. They resolved the discrepancy quickly, a simple error in addition, and Eleanor stood to leave. Mrs. Hayes, wait. She turned back, and Alexander found himself struggling for words. What did he want to say? That he had come to care for her. That the thought of her leaving, of this arrangement ending, filled him with dread. That he looked forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in his day. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked, concerned. No, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done these past months. You've brought life to this house in a way it hasn't had in years. Eleanor smiled, and Alexander's heart skipped. I should be thanking you. You saved our lives, Mr. Blackwood. You gave us a second chance when we had nothing. I'll never forget that. Alexander, he said impulsively. Please call me Alexander, at least when we're in private. All this Mr. Blackwood formality feels wrong after everything we've been through. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. All right, Alexander. And you should call me Eleanor. Eleanor. He tested the name on his tongue and found he liked the sound of it. It suits you. She blushed and looked away. I should go. Thomas will be waiting for me to read him his bedtime story. Of course. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Alexander. After she left, Alexander sat back in his chair, a smile playing on his lips. It was a small step, but it felt significant, like they were building something new, something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Christmas came, and Alexander insisted on celebrating it properly. He had a massive tree brought into the main hall and decorated with candles and ornaments. He bought gifts for all the staff, but especially for Eleanor and Thomas. On Christmas morning, Thomas's excited shouts woke the entire household. Alexander had given the boy a complete set of adventure books and a beautiful wooden toy ship. For Eleanor, he had chosen more carefully, a warm wool coat in deep blue, lined with silk, and a set of fine writing instruments. This is too much, Eleanor protested, though her eyes shone as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the pen. Nonsense. You needed a proper coat, and I thought the writing set would be useful for your work. Thank you, Alexander. Truly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. I have something for you as well. It's not much, but... Alexander unwrapped it carefully and found a pair of hand-knitted gloves, the wool soft and warm. You made these? Mrs. Patterson taught me. I know they're not as fine as what you're used to, but they're perfect. Alexander slipped them on, and they fit perfectly. Thank you, Eleanor. This is the most thoughtful gift I've received in years. And it was true. The society ladies he knew would have given him expensive cufflinks or rare wines, gifts chosen by their servants, meant to impress rather than to please. But Eleanor had made these with her own hands, had spent hours creating something specifically for him. It meant more than she could possibly know. The winter passed peacefully, and spring came to the estate with an explosion of color. The gardens bloomed, and Thomas spent hours exploring the grounds, collecting flowers and insects to study. Eleanor had fully taken over the household management, and the estate ran more smoothly than it ever had under Mrs. Patterson's sole supervision. Alexander's business continued to thrive, but he found himself delegating more and more to his managers, preferring to spend time at home rather than in his city offices. His social obligations he fulfilled with minimal effort, attending only the most necessary functions. His friends noticed the change. "You've become quite the hermit, Blackwood," one of them joked at a dinner party. "What's keeping you locked away on that estate of yours?" "I've simply discovered that I prefer my own company to that of society," Alexander replied smoothly. But it wasn't his own company he preferred. It was Eleanor's and Thomas's. They had become the center of his world, though he was careful not to let it show too obviously. One evening in late April, Alexander was walking through the gardens when he came upon Eleanor sitting on a bench, watching Thomas chase butterflies through the flower beds. She looked peaceful, content in a way he had never seen during those first desperate weeks. "May I join you?" he asked. "Of course." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Thomas play. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I've been thinking about something lately." "What's that?" "About how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was certain Thomas and I were going to die on those streets. I had given up hope of anything better, and now—" She gestured at the gardens, at Thomas laughing as he tried to catch a particularly elusive butterfly. "Now we have this. It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real," Alexander assured her. "You earned this, Eleanor, through your hard work and dedication." "No, I didn't earn this. You gave it to us. Out of kindness, out of generosity. I'll never understand why, but I'm grateful every single day." Alexander turned to face her fully. "Do you really not know why?" Eleanor met his gaze, and something passed between them. A recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. "Alexander," she began, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know that having you and Thomas here, it's made my life better in ways I can't fully express. This house was just a building before you came. Now it's a home." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You've given us so much. More than we could ever repay. I don't want repayment. I just want—" Alexander hesitated, then took the leap. "I just want you to be happy, both of you. And I want to be part of that happiness if you'll let me." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, you and Thomas stopped being my employees and became my family. I'm saying that I care about you, both of you, more than I've ever cared about anyone. And I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then maybe we could build something together. Something real and lasting." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander's heart pounded. Had he overstepped? Had he misread the situation? Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I do feel it. I've been trying not to, trying to maintain proper boundaries, but I can't help it. You've been so good to us, so kind and patient. And Thomas adores you. He talks about you constantly. Alexander said this. Alexander taught me that. You've become the father he never really had." "And you?" Alexander asked softly. "What have I become to you?" Eleanor reached out and took his hand. "Everything. You've become everything." Alexander felt something break open in his chest, years of loneliness and isolation crumbling away. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then let's make this official. Marry me, Eleanor. Let me be your husband and Thomas's father in truth, not just in feeling." "Are you sure? Your friends, your social circle, they'll never accept us. I'm a factory worker, a widow who lived on the streets. They'll say I'm after your money, that I trapped you." "Let them say what they want. I don't care about their opinions. I care about you and Thomas. I care about building a life with people who matter, not impressing people who don't." Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Then yes, I'll marry you." Alexander pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt complete. Thomas noticed them from across the garden and came running over. "Mama, Alexander, look at the butterfly I caught." He skidded to a stop, noticing their embrace. "Are you happy?" "Very happy," Eleanor said, pulling her son into the hug. "Alexander has asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Does that mean Alexander will be my papa?" Alexander knelt down to the boy's level. "If you'll have me, I know I can never replace your real father, but I promise to love you and care for you as if you were my own son. Would that be all right with you?" Thomas threw his arms around Alexander's neck. Yes. I want you to be my papa." And there, in the spring garden with the woman he loved and the boy who had stolen his heart, Alexander Blackwood finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. The wedding took place in June, a small ceremony in the estate's chapel with only the household staff and a few close friends in attendance. Alexander's society acquaintances were scandalized. Of course, the great Alexander Blackwood marrying a penniless widow. But their disapproval only confirmed that he had made the right choice. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and she was more beautiful than any society bride Alexander had ever seen. Thomas served as ring-bearer, his face solemn with the importance of his duty. As Alexander slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, he thought about the chain of events that had led them to this moment. If Marcus Thornton hadn't pushed Eleanor into that ravine, if Thomas hadn't cried out for help, if Alexander's dogs hadn't abandoned the hunt to follow that cry, none of this would have happened. Sometimes, he realized, the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. "I love you," he whispered to Eleanor, as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for saving us." "You saved me too," Alexander said. "I just didn't know I needed saving until I heard Thomas's cry." The reception was held in the gardens, and the household staff had outdone themselves with food and decorations. There was music and dancing, and Thomas ran wild with the other children from the estate, his laughter ringing through the air. As the sun set and lanterns were lit throughout the gardens, Alexander danced with his new wife under the stars. Around them, people celebrated, not because of duty or social obligation, but because they genuinely cared about the couple at the center of it all. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, resting her head on Alexander's shoulder. "I'm thinking about how one moment can change everything. How one decision, to follow a child's cry instead of continuing the hunt, can alter the entire course of your life. Do you regret it? Giving up your old life for this?" Alexander pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "I regret nothing. My old life was empty, Eleanor. I was rich and powerful and completely alone. Now I have you and Thomas, and I'm wealthier than I ever was before. Even though society has turned its back on you? Especially because of that, it showed me who my real friends are, and it freed me from the burden of caring what people think." Eleanor smiled. "You've changed so much from the man who pulled me out of that ravine." "No," Alexander corrected. "I've become the man I was always meant to be. You and Thomas just helped me find my way." As the celebration continued around them, Thomas ran up, tugging on Alexander's sleeve. "Papa! Papa, come see the fireflies! There are hundreds of them!" "Papa!" The word still sent a thrill through Alexander every time he heard it. "Lead the way," he said, taking Thomas's hand. Eleanor took his other hand, and together they walked through the gardens, following the dancing lights of the fireflies. And Alexander thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How the worst day of Eleanor's life had become the beginning of something beautiful for all of them. How a child's desperate cry had led a lonely man to finally find his home. The years that followed were the happiest of Alexander's life. He watched Thomas grow from a frightened, malnourished child into a confident, intelligent young man. He built a life with Eleanor that was based on genuine love and partnership, not social convenience. And he used his wealth and influence to help others who found themselves in the desperate circumstances that had once threatened his family. He established a shelter for homeless families, ensuring that no mother would have to choose between keeping her child and having a roof over their heads. He created job training programs for those who had fallen on hard times. and he used his influence to push for laws that protected the vulnerable from predators like Marcus Thornton. Marcus himself was released from prison after 8 years, a changed man, according to the reports. He left Oregon and was never heard from again. His father's business failed, the family's reputation destroyed by the scandal. Alexander felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a grim acknowledgement that actions have consequences. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Eleanor and Alexander stood in the same garden where he had proposed, watching Thomas, now 11 years old, practice archery with his tutor. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked. "The day in the ravine?" "Sometimes," Alexander admitted. "Usually when I want to remind myself how precious this all is, how easily it could have been different. If you hadn't heard Thomas's cry, but I did hear it, and I followed it, and it led me to you." Alexander pulled Eleanor close. "I used to think I was the one who saved you that day, but the truth is, you saved me. You and Thomas gave me something to live for beyond money and power. You gave me a family, a purpose, a home." Eleanor kissed him softly. "We saved each other then. That seems fair." Thomas's arrow hit the target dead center, and he turned to them with a triumphant grin. "Did you see that, Papa? Did you see?" "I saw," Alexander called back. "Excellent shot." As Thomas returned to his practice, Eleanor rested her head on Alexander's shoulder. "I never imagined I could be this happy. After Robert died, after we lost everything, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, not to us." "Happiness isn't something that happens to you," Alexander said. "It's something you build, piece by piece, day by day. And we've built something beautiful here." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "we have." The sun set over the estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the household preparing dinner, the comfortable rhythms of a home filled with life and love. And Alexander Blackwood, once known as the Alpha King, cold, powerful, and alone, stood with his wife and watched their son practice archery, and knew that he had finally found his kingdom. Not in wealth or influence or social standing, but in the simple, profound joy of being loved and loving in return. It had all started with a cry in the darkness, a desperate child calling for help, and that cry had led him home,